Imagine a world where the ultimate price for one's crimes isn't death, but a chance for redemption. A world where justice isn't measured by the taking of a life, but by the restoration of humanity. Picture a justice system that values rehabilitation over retribution, that seeks to heal rather than harm. What if, instead of state-sanctioned executions, societies chose a path that upheld the sanctity of life, even for those who had committed the gravest offenses? This isn't a utopian fantasy, but a real possibility within our grasp if we dare to rethink the death penalty. The death penalty, a practice deeply embedded in the justice systems of many countries, remains one of the most contentious and debated issues in contemporary society. While proponents argue that it serves as a deterrent and delivers justice, the moral, ethical, and practical implications of capital punishment provide a compelling case for its worldwide abolition. This essay seeks to articulate the multifaceted arguments against the death penalty, addressing its moral failures, the risk of wrongful execution, its ineffectiveness as a deterrent, and the discriminatory application that undermines the principles of justice. Moral and ethical considerations. At its core, the death penalty poses profound moral and ethical questions. The sanctity of human life is a foundational principle in many societies and philosophies. Capital punishment inherently contradicts this principle by endorsing the deliberate taking of a human life as a form of punishment. The moral argument against the death penalty hinges on the belief that no state or government should have the authority to take a life, regardless of the crime committed. This perspective is supported by various religious and philosophical traditions that advocate for forgiveness, rehabilitation, and the inherent dignity of every human being. Moreover, the death penalty can be seen as a form of state-sanctioned revenge rather than true justice. Justice should aim to rehabilitate and restore rather than perpetuate a cycle of violence. By executing offenders, societies adopt a punitive rather than restorative approach, which can have deleterious effects on the social fabric. The moral high ground is lost when the state mirrors the violence of the perpetrator, reinforcing the notion that killing is an acceptable response to grievous acts. Risk of wrongful execution. One of the most compelling arguments for abolishing the death penalty is the irreversible risk of executing an innocent person. The justice system, despite its rigorous procedures and checks, is not infallible. There are numerous documented cases where individuals sentenced to death were later exonerated due to new evidence, often after spending decades on death row. The advent of DNA testing has revealed the unsettling number of wrongful convictions, highlighting systemic flaws such as unreliable eyewitness testimony, inadequate legal representation, prosecutorial misconduct, and racial bias. For instance, the Innocence Project in the United States has exonerated over 375 individuals, 21 of whom were on death row, through DNA testing. These cases underscore the fallibility of the justice system and the potential for tragic, irreversible errors. The execution of even a single innocent person is an inexcusable miscarriage of justice that fundamentally undermines the credibility and moral authority of the legal system. Ineffectiveness as a deterrent. Proponents of the death penalty often argue that it serves as a powerful deterrent against serious crimes, such as murder and terrorism. However, extensive research and empirical evidence cast significant doubt on this claim. Studies comparing crime rates in jurisdictions with and without the death penalty have consistently shown no conclusive evidence that capital punishment deters crime more effectively than long-term imprisonment. For example, a 2012 report by the National Research Council of the National Academies in the United States concluded that existing studies are insufficient to establish a deterrent effect of the death penalty. Moreover, crime rates in countries that have abolished the death penalty often remain comparable to, or even lower than, those in countries that retain it. This suggests that factors other than the presence of the death penalty play a more crucial role in influencing crime rates, such as socio-economic conditions, effective law enforcement, and comprehensive crime prevention strategies. Discriminatory application. The application of the death penalty is fraught with discrimination and bias, further undermining its legitimacy as a just form of punishment. Studies have consistently shown that race, socio-economic status, and geographic location significantly influence who receives a death sentence. In the United States, for example, African Americans are disproportionately represented on death row, and the race of the victim often plays a critical role in determining whether a defendant is sentenced to death. This discriminatory application extends beyond racial bias to include disparities based on legal representation. Individuals from disadvantaged backgrounds are less likely to afford competent legal defense, resulting in a higher likelihood of receiving a death sentence. The intersection of these factors creates a system where the death penalty is not applied uniformly or fairly, but rather, arbitrarily and capriciously. Internationally, the situation is similarly problematic. In countries with less transparent judicial processes, the risk of discrimination and unfair trials is even more pronounced. Political repression, lack of due process, and corrupt legal systems further exacerbate the injustices associated with capital punishment. Psychological and social impact. The psychological toll of the death penalty on all involved is profound. For the condemned, the prolonged wait on death row, often under harsh conditions, can amount to psychological torture. The uncertainty, isolation, and inhumane living conditions can lead to severe mental health issues, compounding the punishment beyond the sentence of death itself. Additionally, the families of both the victim and the offender are deeply affected. For the families of the executed, the loss is compounded by societal stigma and the psychological trauma of losing a loved one to state-sanctioned killing. For the families of victims, the lengthy and often publicized legal process can prolong their suffering, denying them closure and perpetuating their pain. Global trends and human rights. The global trend is increasingly moving towards the abolition of the death penalty. According to Amnesty International, as of 2020, 108 countries had abolished the death penalty for all crimes, while over two-thirds of the world's countries are abolitionist in law or practice. This shift reflects a growing international consensus that the death penalty is incompatible with modern human rights standards. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 1948, proclaims the right to life as a fundamental human right. The death penalty, by its very nature, violates this right. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR, to which over 170 countries are parties, also underscores the right to life and calls for the progressive abolition of the death penalty. The growing number of countries ratifying international treaties that oppose capital punishment signifies a global recognition of its incompatibility with human rights principles. Alternatives to capital punishment. There are viable alternatives to the death penalty that can achieve the goals of punishment, deterrence, and justice without resorting to execution. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole is one such alternative that ensures public safety by permanently removing dangerous individuals from society while avoiding the moral and ethical issues associated with capital punishment. Restorative justice programs offer another alternative, focusing on rehabilitation and reconciliation rather than retribution. These programs aim to address the harm caused by crime through dialogue and mediation, allowing offenders to make amends and victims to heal. Such approaches have been shown to reduce recidivism and foster a more just and compassionate society. Conclusion. The abolition of the death penalty worldwide is not merely an idealistic aspiration but a necessary step towards a more humane and just society. The moral and ethical objections to state-sanctioned killing, the risk of wrongful execution, the lack of deterrent effect, and the discriminatory application all present compelling reasons for ending this practice. Additionally, the psychological and social impacts, alongside the global trend towards human rights and the availability of effective alternatives, further reinforce the case for abolition. In the pursuit of justice, societies must strive to uphold the highest standards of human rights and dignity. The death penalty, with its inherent flaws and moral contradictions, falls short of these standards. By abolishing capital punishment, the global community can take a significant step towards a more equitable and compassionate world, where the sanctity of human life is respected and true justice is served.